What if you woke up tomorrow with no home, no bed, no place to feel safe? What if the streets of Ohio, your streets, were all you had? How would you survive? Right now, in the Buckeye State, thousands of people are living that nightmare. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story, please subscribe to Minimalist US. Hit that subscribe button now. It helps us continue bringing you the stories that need to be told, the voices that need to be heard. In 2024, 11,759 Ohioans were homeless on a single night, a number that's climbed year after year, leaving families, kids, and veterans out in the cold. That's nearly 12,000 lives shattered, and here's the gut punch. That number jumped 3% in just 1 year, while the nation saw an 18% surge. Ohio's crisis is bad, but it's not even the worst. Yet it's still heartbreaking. Why are we letting this happen in a state known for its heartland values? Why are our neighbors sleeping under bridges? And what's it going to take to fix this? Let's dive into the numbers, because they tell a story that's hard to ignore. Back in 2015, Ohio's homeless population was around 10,000, based on estimates from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's annual point-in-time counts. These counts, taken on a single night in January, give us a snapshot of people in shelters, transitional housing, or living unsheltered, on streets, in cars, or in places not meant for humans. By 2018, the number of Ohioans accessing homelessness services had skyrocketed to 76,478, a 30.8% increase from 2012, while the state's overall population grew by just 1.3%. That's a crisis growing 24 times faster than the population. In 2019, the count was 10,654, with 2,036 in Columbus alone, a 7% jump from the year before. By 2022, it was over 10,000 again, and in 2023, it hit 11,386, a 6.9% increase in 1 year. Then, in 2024, the number reached 11,759, up 3% from 2023, according to HUD's 2024 Annual Homelessness Assessment Report. That's a steady climb, and every number is a person, a child, a parent, a grandparent struggling to survive. But these numbers don't tell the whole story. The 2024 count of 11,759 is likely an undercount. Point-in-time counts miss people who are doubled up, crashing with friends or family, living in motels, or hiding in plain sight. The methodology itself is flawed, asking volunteers to count people who are often trying to remain invisible. The hidden reality is staggering. Experts estimate the real number of Ohioans experiencing homelessness over a year could be 7 times higher, potentially over 70,000. In 2018 alone, 23,000 people in Cuyahoga County, home to Cleveland, faced homelessness, with nearly 3,000 students in Cleveland's public schools counted as homeless. In 2019, 35,000 Ohio students struggled with homelessness at some point during the school year. Imagine that. A child in your kid's classroom, carrying the weight of not knowing where they'll sleep tonight. These point-in-time surveys, conducted on cold January nights, capture only those visible to volunteers and outreach workers. They miss the families staying in overcrowded apartments, the teenagers sleeping in cars, the elderly hiding their homelessness out of shame. Weather conditions during the count dramatically affect numbers, as people seek deeper shelter during harsh winters. Some regions lack sufficient volunteers or resources to conduct thorough counts, particularly in rural areas where homelessness might be scattered across vast distances. The timing of these counts also matters. January represents the peak of winter hardship, but homelessness fluctuates throughout the year. Summer months might see different patterns, with more people living outdoors but also more transient populations that are harder to track. Seasonal work, agricultural cycles, and tourism patterns all affect homeless populations in ways that a single night count can't capture. Educational data provides another lens into the crisis. School districts are required to identify homeless students under the McKinney-Vento Act, and their numbers often exceed point-in-time counts significantly. This suggests that family homelessness, in particular, is far more widespread than official tallies indicate. When we look at the broader picture, considering all forms of housing instability, the numbers become truly alarming. The discrepancy between official counts and reality reveals a system that's failing to capture the full scope of the crisis. Families experiencing homelessness often remain hidden, staying with relatives or friends in overcrowded conditions, moving frequently to avoid detection. Single adults might sleep in their cars, in 24-hour businesses, or in places that aren't traditionally considered homeless encampments. Veterans might couchsurf rather than access services due to pride or mistrust of systems that have failed them before. This undercount has serious policy implications. Funding for homeless services is often tied to point-in-time count numbers, meaning communities with hidden homeless populations receive fewer resources than they actually need. Who's bearing the brunt of this crisis? The faces of Ohio's homeless are diverse, but the patterns are stark and revealing. In 2024, nearly 80% of Ohio's homeless were sheltered, in emergency shelters or transitional housing, but 20% were unsheltered, living on the streets or in encampments. That's a 29% increase in unsheltered homelessness since the pandemic began, making the crisis more visible than ever. In Columbus, the 2025 point-in-time count found 2,556 people homeless, a 7.4% jump from 2024, with 455 living outside, though that's a slight 1% drop from the year before. The increase in sheltered homelessness coupled with a small decrease in unsheltered populations suggests that while more people are experiencing homelessness, communities are working to move people indoors, though capacity remains severely limited. Families with children make up a devastating portion of this crisis. 3% in Columbus in 2019, and statewide. A third of those accessing services in 2018 were kids under 18, including 2,258 infants not even a year old. Picture a baby, not even walking yet, with no crib, no home. That's the reality for thousands. These aren't just statistics, they represent children whose earliest memories will be shaped by instability, uncertainty, and the trauma of not having a safe place to call home. Family homelessness has unique characteristics that make it particularly heartbreaking. Unlike single adults who might choose to remain hidden, families often have no choice but to engage with systems, schools, healthcare, social services, that can identify their housing status. This means children experiencing homelessness face additional challenges. Frequent school changes, difficulty maintaining friendships, stigma from peers, and the psychological burden of adult worries at a young age. Parents experiencing homelessness with children face impossible choices daily. Whether to split up the family to access gender-segregated shelters, how to maintain employment while managing constant housing instability, and how to protect their children's mental health while dealing with their own trauma and stress. The impact on child development is profound and long-lasting. Studies show that children who experience homelessness have higher rates of developmental delays, behavioral problems, and academic struggles. They're more likely to repeat grades, change schools frequently, and have difficulty forming stable relationships. The stress of homelessness affects brain development, particularly in young children, potentially creating lifelong challenges with learning, emotional regulation, and social skills. Many homeless children exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, including hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping, and emotional outbursts. Older adults represent another growing and vulnerable segment of Ohio's homeless population, facing challenges that are often life-threatening. Between 2012 and 2018, homelessness among those aged 55 to 64 jumped 85%. And for those 65 and older, it soared by 208%. These are people who've worked their whole lives, paid taxes, raised families, and contributed to their communities, now facing health crises with nowhere to recover. Their risk of early death is sky-high, with homeless older adults facing emergency room visits and mortality rates far above their housed peers. The challenges facing older homeless adults are particularly severe and complex. Age-related health conditions become life-threatening when you're living on the streets or in inadequate shelter. Diabetes becomes unmanageable without refrigeration for insulin or regular meals. Heart conditions worsen without proper rest and medical care. Mobility issues make it nearly impossible to navigate shelter systems or access services that require walking long distances or climbing stairs. Many older adults experiencing homelessness are dealing with fixed incomes that haven't kept pace with rising housing costs, making it impossible to afford rent even with Social Security or pension benefits. The median income for homeless adults over 50 is often less than $700 per month, while average rent for even a studio apartment far exceeds this amount. Medical expenses further drain limited resources, forcing impossible choices between medication and food, between doctor visits and shelter fees. Unaccompanied youth represent 3.7% of Columbus's homeless population in 2019, often kids aging out of foster care or fleeing unsafe homes. These young people face unique vulnerabilities, including higher rates of exploitation, trafficking, and violence. Without family support systems, They're often ill-equipped to navigate adult responsibilities while still dealing with the trauma that led to their homelessness in the first place. Many have experienced abuse, neglect, or family rejection, particularly LGBTQ+ youth who are disproportionately represented among homeless young people. Veterans represent another tragic face of this crisis. While their numbers dropped nearly 15% since 2020 thanks to targeted programs, any veteran on the streets is one too many. These are men and women who served our country, who put their lives on the line for our freedom, now abandoned by the very society they protected. Many struggle with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, or other service-connected disabilities that make civilian life challenging. The transition from military structure to civilian chaos can be overwhelming, particularly when combined with housing instability and limited support systems. The racial disparities in Ohio's homelessness crisis are shocking and impossible to ignore. In 2018, Black Ohioans made up 12.4% of the state's population but 48.8% of those accessing homelessness services, while white Ohioans, 81% of the population, were just 45.4% of the homeless. That's a glaring imbalance that didn't emerge in a vacuum. It's the direct result of centuries of systemic racism that has shaped American housing policy. These disparities are rooted in decades of redlining, discriminatory lending practices, and unequal access to jobs and quality education. Black families are more likely to face eviction, experience poverty, and encounter housing instability, putting them at dramatically higher risk of homelessness. In Cuyahoga County, a staggering 80% of those entering shelters in 2018 were people of color. This isn't just a housing crisis. It's a racial justice crisis that's tearing Ohio's communities apart. Historical practices like redlining, which began in the 1930s, systematically denied black families access to homeownership in desirable neighborhoods, concentrating poverty and limiting wealth accumulation for generations. The GI Bill, which helped millions of white veterans buy homes after World War II, largely excluded black veterans through discriminatory lending practices and segregated housing markets. These policies created a wealth gap that persists today, leaving black families with less generational wealth to fall back on during economic crises. Contemporary discrimination continues to perpetuate these disparities. Black renters are more likely to be rejected for apartments, offered higher rents, and shown fewer properties than white renters with identical qualifications and income. The criminal justice system also plays a significant role, as Black Ohioans are disproportionately likely to have criminal records, which create additional barriers to housing when landlords routinely screen out applicants with any criminal history. The intersection of race and homelessness also affects access to services and treatment within the homeless system itself. Studies show that black individuals experiencing homelessness often wait longer for permanent housing placements, receive fewer resources, and face additional barriers to accessing mental health and substance abuse treatment. Cultural competency in service delivery remains a significant challenge, with many programs designed without consideration for the unique experiences and needs of communities of color. Native American populations, while smaller in Ohio, also experience homelessness at rates far exceeding their representation in the general population. Hispanic and Latino communities face additional barriers including language access, immigration status concerns, and cultural factors that may prevent engagement with traditional homeless services. Where is this crisis unfolding across Ohio? Columbus stands as ground zero, with 2,556 homeless individuals in 2025, representing a 7.4% jump from the previous year. Franklin County, where Columbus sits, faces a looming disaster. A 2024 report warned that homelessness could spike 68% by 2028 if current trends continue unchecked. This projection isn't just speculation. It's based on current trajectories of housing costs, wage stagnation, and service capacity limitations. Cleveland's Cuyahoga County reported 23,000 people experiencing homelessness in 2017, with 2,750 students in Cleveland public schools affected. The urban concentration of homelessness in Cleveland reflects broader patterns of economic disinvestment, population loss, and housing stock deterioration that have plagued Rust Belt cities for decades. Cincinnati's homeless population included 1,381 children in 2023, representing 23% of the city's total homeless count, highlighting the particular vulnerability of families in Ohio's third-largest city. But homelessness isn't confined to Ohio's major metropolitan areas. Appalachian Ohio, encompassing 32 rural counties, faces unique challenges that urban areas don't encounter. With only 792 of the state's 3,314 emergency shelter beds located in rural areas as of 2022, Vast stretches of southeastern Ohio have virtually no emergency housing infrastructure. Places like Adams and Brown counties, each with approximately 500 homeless individuals, rely on shelters so small they can house fewer than 20 people at a time. Rural homelessness often remains invisible, hidden in the hollers and backwoods where poverty has persisted for generations. The decline of coal mining, manufacturing job losses, and agricultural consolidation have left entire communities economically devastated. When the last major employer closes its doors, families face impossible choices. Abandon the land their families have called home for generations, or stay and face increasing poverty and housing instability. Transportation barriers compound rural homelessness challenges. Without reliable public transit, accessing services might require traveling 50 or 100 miles, an impossible journey for someone without a car or gas money. Mental health and addiction treatment services are particularly scarce in rural areas, leaving individuals with dual diagnoses, homelessness combined with untreated mental health or substance abuse issues, with virtually no support options. The opioid crisis has hit rural Ohio particularly hard, with overdose rates in some Appalachian counties exceeding national averages by significant margins. Addiction often leads to job loss, family breakdown, and eventually housing loss, creating a pipeline from substance abuse to homelessness that rural communities are ill-equipped to address. What's driving this crisis? There's a perfect storm of interconnected factors, and it starts with housing affordability. Ohio faces a shortage of 270,399 affordable homes for extremely low-income renters, meaning for every 100 low-income households, there are only 44 affordable units available. In Franklin County, the situation is even more dire. Just 26 affordable units exist for every 100 households that need them. This scarcity creates fierce competition for limited affordable housing and drives up prices across the entire rental market. Rent increases are crushing Ohio families at an unprecedented rate. From 2021 to 2023, the average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in Ohio jumped 18%, while median rents in central Ohio rose 34% from 2017 to 2022, outpacing the national increase of 29%. These aren't gradual adjustments. They're dramatic spikes that have outstripped wage growth by enormous margins. Over 700,000 Ohioans, more than 1 in 15 residents, spend over half their income on rent, leaving them perpetually one missed paycheck, one medical emergency, one car repair away from eviction. In 2018, 70% of the lowest income households were severely rent-burdened, spending more than half their income on housing costs, compared to less than 1% of higher income earners. This creates a two-tiered housing system where economic mobility becomes nearly impossible for those at the bottom. The wage-to-rent gap reveals the fundamental economics driving homelessness. Ohio's minimum wage in 2018 was $8.30 an hour, but to afford a two-bedroom apartment at fair market rent, a worker needed to earn $15.25 an hour working full-time. A single mother working minimum wage would have had to work 73 hours per week, nearly 2 full-time jobs, just to afford basic housing. This gap has only widened in recent years as rents have increased faster than wages. Poverty rates across Ohio tell the story of economic distress that creates pathways to homelessness. In 2018, 18.3% of Cuyahoga County residents and 35.2% of Clevelanders lived below the federal poverty line, with Cleveland's child poverty rate reaching a staggering 48.7%. These aren't temporary setbacks. They represent generational cycles of poverty that trap families in instability. The end of COVID-19 relief programs created a perfect storm for housing displacement. Eviction moratoriums and rental assistance programs, including the $30 million Ohio received from the American Rescue Plan Act in 2021, temporarily stemmed the tide of housing displacement. These programs kept hundreds of thousands of Ohioans housed during the economic uncertainty of the pandemic. However, when federal funding expired and moratoriums lifted, a wave of delayed evictions swept across the state. When those federal funds ran dry, evictions surged, and housing instability skyrocketed across Ohio. In Cleveland alone, 12 evictions occurred every day in 2018. That's 12 families losing everything every single day, and this was before the pandemic even began. The post-pandemic surge has been even more devastating. with eviction rates climbing as rental assistance programs ended and economic pressures intensified. Mental health and addiction create additional, often overlooked pathways into homelessness. In 2018, 67% of Ohio's homeless population had a mental health diagnosis, while 19.5% had a documented substance use disorder. These conditions often intersect, creating complex challenges that require coordinated, specialized treatment approaches that are rarely available. In Summit County in 2022, 19% of homeless individuals battled addiction, outpacing other health conditions as a primary barrier to housing stability. Franklin County witnessed a devastating 76% increase in overdose deaths among the homeless population from 2019 to 2021, highlighting the deadly intersection of housing instability and substance abuse. Homeless youth face particular vulnerability. 79% abuse opioids to cope with trauma, according to Ohio State University research. This isn't just a personal struggle. It's a systemic failure that reflects inadequate mental health services, limited addiction treatment options, and barriers to care that keep people trapped in cycles of homelessness and substance abuse. The criminalization of homelessness makes recovery and stability nearly impossible. Cincinnati's Ordinance 910-12 bans panhandling in certain areas, while Columbus's 2018 ordinance restricts how and where people can ask for help.